All right, we've arrived at the Acolyte episode 3. This is the big controversial episode. First of all, before we go any further, I did a video on Saturday. I actually did the video on Thursday or Friday, but I uploaded on Saturday where it was a quote from the actress, the lead actress from this show, Amandla Stenberg, and it was from this like Twitter account, and it was incorrect. The quote was taken out of context, so I deleted the video. My bad on that. It was sent to me by a friend, and I didn't do any homework. My friend even apologized to me because he didn't realize that it was a clip from another movie, not Star Wars. So either way, let's talk about the Acolyte episode 3. The spoiler had kind of been out there, the leak. I avoided it other than going on Den of Nerds' stream this morning, and I heard what was going on and what was said. We'll talk about it. So this episode is the vast majority of this episode. In fact, the entire thing takes place in the past, 16 years earlier, before the time period that we're in right now, like before that High Republic. Well, it was still the High Republic time period. And basically, what they're doing now is they're borrowing from ideas that George Lucas came up with, namely the fatherless birth and the twins being special, which we saw in the original trilogy, and then of course the prequel trilogy with the virgin birth. Remember, if you watch the original trilogy, the original 3 movies, at no point does it ever state that Darth Vader was born out of the Force or Anakin. Like, none of that. That was added later on by George Lucas. So they're kind of covering this here. So basically, throughout the majority of the episode, it's about Osha and May, and they're from this coven of witches. Now, the idea of witches being able to tap into the Force, in and of itself, that's not really a problem. We saw that with the Night Sisters, and I actually like the idea that there's different cultures having different perspectives on what the Force is. It's no different than how in the real world we have many different religions that have similarities, but they're not identical, and their view of God and the Messiah, differs. This, basically, the way I'm interpreting it is that this coven of witches, not only do they understand the Force, but they call it the thread. Now, the thread, the idea of the Force being a thread, I think has bothered a lot of people, because I think people think they're retconning the Force, and in a way they sort of are, but if it's another culture's interpretation of the Force, I don't think that's that, infuriating for Star Wars fans. At least that's the way I'm interpreting it. So there's this ritual called the Ascension to become a witch. And once again, I want to reiterate that the costume still looks second rate. Like in this episode, I mentioned that last week, and it feels like it. To be honest with you, the issue I had with this episode, because a lot of people are going to throw the woke word around, or they're going to throw, and I'm going to get to all that here in a minute. But the main issue I had with this is that this took forever. There was a ceremony where they had to become, to ascend or whatever, and it felt like a complete waste of time. They could have wrapped it up sooner or done a montage or something. It just took forever. So the Jedi show up, right? And Carrie-Anne Moss is there, and the idea is they find out there's children there. So the idea here is that, according to the Republic, the Jedi heard they're training children, and if there are Force-sensitive children, the Jedi have to get involved. Now, I believe that's something from Legends. I believe that's something from the original canon, but I don't remember in detail, right? But in a way that kind of makes the Jedi look bad. And I feel like a lot of the messaging behind not just the prequels, but also the sequels and other stuff that's come out has kind of been to not necessarily bury the Jedi, but to make them look like they're less than stellar compared to how we dreamed they would be after the original trilogy. You know what I mean? It feels like this era of Star Wars, and it's not just a Disney thing, it may have started before then, is sort of making it seem like the Jedi of this era were very prideful, they had a big hubris, and it cost them. So in a way, they're kind of sort of painted as the bad guys here to a degree, and it's implied they want to take the kids. And so Osha accepts the test to become a Jedi. And what ends up happening is it's the same test that Anakin had in episode 1. They just borrowed it from there. So then here's where the controversial stuff comes in. So the village of the coven of witches, there's no men, right? It's just a planet of women, or at least the village. And Osha and May were created with the Force. Basically, these witches knew how to tap into the Force and impregnate each other. So they don't need a man. Now, obviously, a lot of people are going to take this as Star Wars saying, the Force is female and they don't need men. I mean, I understand people taking it that way because when you take the comments that have been made publicly by Kathleen Kennedy and other people at Lucasfilm and you look at this product, it's very hard for them to say, no, we're not putting, feminist messaging. No, we're not doing any of that. It's hard to believe them. So I think a lot of people are going to leave this episode thinking that it's sort of, this episode kind of makes men look bad, in a way. Not entirely, but in a way. But also, I think the real problem, to be honest, is that this somewhat takes away from the miracle that was Anakin Skywalker. I'm not saying that Anakin Skywalker has to be the only child that was born of the Force, but this sort of cutting off of Anakin's balls. This is nothing new. If you want me to be real with you, this actually started with the Rise of Skywalker. If the prophecy was that the Chosen One would bring balance to the Force, and he did defeat Darth Sidious in Return of the Jedi and kill him, Darth Sidious should have never come back. And if you remember, when I did my review for that movie, I talked about that. And I talked about how, in a way, they're basically, making the prophecy of the one who will bring balance, they're kind of, ruining that. So they already ruined that. Now the idea here is that Anakin is not the only one that was born of the Force. Osha and May are. Now, again, that takes away from the original trilogy and George Lucas's vision because, correct me if I'm wrong, but was it not implied that there could only be one, person that was created by the Force? Am I mixing that up with actual, Judeo-Christian, religion here? Because I know that's where they borrowed the idea from, obviously. The Immaculate Conception. God, the Virgin Mary got pregnant with never sleeping with a human man, and Jesus was born. That's where the idea came from. So what ends up happening is there's this sort of power play because the Coven of Witches does not want Osha to leave with the Jedi, but she wants independence. She wants to be a Jedi. May doesn't want her to go, so May ends up setting the whole place on fire, which that kind of reminds me of The Last Jedi, how we're supposed to believe that Kylo Ren was the one that lit up the place and burned down the Jedi Temple from Luke. So it's almost like they're borrowing concepts from the Skywalker saga and giving it to these other characters. And once again, I feel like doing that kind of takes away from those characters. So the place ends up burning down, which is weird because it's implied that everybody's dead. I don't know about that. I feel like there's something else that we're not being told here. Either the Jedi did something really messed up or somebody else did. There's still pieces of this puzzle that have not been really resolved yet. But the episode ends with Saul consoling Osha, and then Osha realizes that May is alive. So it's basically the backstory of how we got here. Look, the issue I had with this episode is that it was boring and that I didn't care. All the stuff about women not needing men and all that stuff, there's gonna be a lot of YouTube channels that complain about this. There are, right? There's gonna be a ton of them that complain about this messaging. And I understand. Again, I understand that that wasn't the worst part of the episode, though. To me, it was just the lore breaking. I don't know if they're going to explain more as the season progresses. And again, I like the idea of other cultures' viewpoints of the Force not being the same with the Jedi. Palpatine said it himself in episode 3 that the Jedi's perspective of the Force is dogmatic and narrow-minded, and that there are lots of aspects of the Force out there. Like, I like that idea. I don't like the idea of this coven of witches creating children of the Force. And again, viewing the episode, now that I've actually seen the episode, it did not seem like they were throwing it in our faces. It did not seem like they were purposely, like, it didn't seem from my, like, I didn't sense that they were trying to, like, make it so that men were incompetent or that women were better than men. Although one can certainly take that interpretation. What I'm trying to say is, if you were offended at this episode and the messaging behind it, I understand. I wasn't offended because this type of shit never offends me. You know what I mean? I'm not so sensitive to where I let some science fiction, fantasy show ruin my day. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I'm just not going to let it ruin my day. And going into it, we kind of already knew what was up, but it ultimately, I don't like the Anakin, I don't like the Immaculate Conception stuff. The planet of them all being women, I had no problem with that. There was actually a really good episode of The Outer Limits, the 90s version, where a man ends up on a planet with a bunch of women. And that episode had a little bit of propaganda about how men cause wars and all that stuff. And I still enjoyed that episode as a man. Like, I don't get butthurt over this shit, bro. Like, I'm a grown-ass man. Like, I'm not going to make videos whining and crying about how Disney's woke 10 times a day, dude. Like, if you want me to be honest, that shit shows weakness, dude. Like, I don't know, getting offended at this, I just want a good fucking story. I don't care about any of this. I do not care about personal politics or whatever crap they want to put in here. I just want a good story. And this episode was boring. And all it did was rehash ideas that we already saw before. Except earlier. So now, where do we believe the prophecy of the one that'll bring balance to the Force? Where does that fit in? Because I feel like all these retcons have kind of shat on that prophecy. Maybe when Yoda said in Revenge of the Sith that maybe they misunderstood the prophecy. Maybe that's what they mean. But it sounds like they're just like, with every new Star Wars series, they're kind of like going away from it and focusing more on this dyad crap that was invented for Rise of Skywalker. There were aspects of this episode that felt more like Star Trek than Star Wars. And that's not necessarily like an insult, but it wasn't good Star Trek. It actually kind of felt like cheap, bad Star Trek. That's the way I kind of felt watching this. You understand what I'm saying? I'm not into this show, and it has nothing to do with woke or any of that stuff. It's just, I don't find the show to be that interesting. Now, I don't hate the show either. I don't think it's the worst piece of garbage ever, like The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker were. I'm sorry, but that's how it is. But, like, as far as me getting offended at this planet filled with women crap, like, in the real world, it doesn't matter. But I will say that it is infuriating that Kathleen Kennedy and Disney still have not learned from this mistake and are still going hard with this when literally, it's almost like every time the fans complain, they double down on it. And it's gotten to the point now where I wonder if they do a show that has nothing but white men in it, right? I wonder if that's going to, like, lead to people saying that they did that just because they felt that they were forced to. So what can Disney actually do to get out of this? And what I keep saying is just tell good stories. Just focus on telling good stories. And The way I feel right now as we speak, I don't think that the Acolyte's telling that interesting of a story, bro. It really is coming off like they're borrowing ideas from the Skywalker saga, you know, and the twins, and it's just the same shit. You know, I would have actually liked something different here. Like maybe the twins were given to them by Abeloth, or like something like different. Like maybe there's a creature like in some planet somewhere that can birth like girls, and maybe like these two happen to be force sensitive for whatever reason. Maybe a kyber crystal the creature ate it or something. I'm just saying, like, they could have, I think they could have come up with something more creative than this. I really do. This felt very uncreative, repetitive, and honestly boring. And this is not one of those shows already that I'm going to go back to watch again. It's Andor put me to sleep right off the hop. This show, because there's Jedi involved, I'm a little bit more into it, but it's not capturing the world for me, you know? It's not setting the world on fire for me. So those are my thoughts. Am I done watching it? I don't know. I don't think we've gotten to the point yet where I despise this show so much that I'm going to just drop it. But as far as me like anticipating it every week or looking forward to it, I really don't. You know, as of right now, I think I'm probably still going to review next week's episode. Don't know if it'll be on time, but you know, what I'm saying is I don't really know where I stand with this as far as am I going to keep watching it or not. I know some people, again, are done. You know, I get it and I respect it. For me, it's like, it's not offending me so much to where I'm, this whole thing about how this episode is supposed to break Star Wars and ruin the lore, I disagree. I don't think it really did that. I think what it did do, though, I think, is it's going to end up confusing a lot of people. You know what I mean? I don't think the lore is totally broken, but I think there's going to be a lot of confusion coming out of this one. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on episode 3 of The Acolyte. Have a nice day. See you guys real soon.